Grab some popcorn, take your seats, and turn down the lights. It's time once again for the Movie Files, with your hosts, Steve Wannall, Stephon Walker, and Dave Wright.
So this is the Movie Files inaugural episode. My name is Dave.
I'm Steve.
I'm Stephon.
We have known each other now 20 plus years. We are a collection of performers. We've done everything from I'm not sure what else to call it.
We're a gaggle of actors.
That's right. So between us, we're actor, director, producer, sideshow, pickpocketer,
magician, mime,
whore.
That's accurate.
Perfect. First curse word, and we're a minute in.
Whore.
Now you be the
I didn't
expert.
say fucking whore.
That is true. That is true.
And our first edit.
So we thought that for our first episode, it would be good to have a topic that shows what made us lovers of movies to begin with. So I decided to maybe start us off with the topic of the movies that influenced us in terms of our love of movies. So I'll start. For me, the movie that really made me love movies was Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was 11 years old.
1981?
81.
Yeah.
I was 11 years old.
Nailed it.
Right? My dad saw it first. He said, son, you're going to love this movie. I want to take you to this movie. And I thought it looked stupid. You know, it's olden times. You know, you're an 11-year-old. You don't really understand.
This is like a Western.
Yeah, right? Like, where are the cars? You know what I mean? Like, where are the phones or whatever? It just didn't seem like it was modern enough for me. So olden times meant it was boring. And, I went with him and saw it. And it was amazing. It blew me away. And I saw it 3 times that weekend. And I think I ended up seeing it like 12 or 13 times in the theater.
This is back in the day when you didn't have to take out a personal loan to keep going to the theater.
Correct. Now I would have to, mortgage my house to do it. But it was amazing. And so for me, like every time I think about like that love that I have of going to the movies and sitting in the theater and being excited about it, it really kind of stems from that. I mean, I saw movies before, and there are other things and other movies that have come since or before that, I liked or I have fond memories of, that are among my favorites. But the one that really kind of jump-started it for me was Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Where was the moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark that was there a defining moment when you realized, oh my God, this movie this is everything?
I mean, really,
right off the bat,
the boulder. I mean, it was unbelievable. Just this, because also I feel like I know, obviously looking back on it, it was trying to recreate the old time Saturday morning serials. The
cliffhangers.
Exactly. But I had never seen a movie that started like that. Usually movies always were about setting up the action. So the first part of it is always about introducing the characters and this is where they're going to be. And here's the exposition and all that. And now here comes the action or whatever it might be. And here we are. They just jump right into it. And you're just immediately put right in the middle of this crazy story. You don't have any context. You don't know what he's going after. And it just I was blown away. I'm like, this starting with this. And then it just kept going from there. I mean, to me, it was, and Harrison Ford, I mean, he was the quintessential movie star. He still really
fresh
is.
off of Han Solo.
Exactly. I mean, you think about that. I mean, that time, in his life, I mean, he was two of the most iconic characters coming out. I mean, Empire was 1980, which I should say that one was great too. That came out the year before. I remember seeing that with my dad to kind of springboard, but I remember the cliffhanger. Empire was actually another good one too.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is going to be bleeding into where I'm going, I think.
Okay. But like, I remember seeing that and when he was, at the end, he gets frozen in the carbonite and then, you don't know what's going on and they just leave it. And of course, Luke, I'm your father, right? Yeah. So I'm driving home with my dad and I'm like, what's going on? I don't understand.
It left it open-ended.
Yeah.
They can't do that.
Is he dead? Is Han Solo dead? He can't be dead. And my dad's like, I don't know. Well, but Luke can't be his son. I mean, that's not, what do you mean? And he's like, I don't know. We'll have to find out. Well, when is the next movie going to come out? I don't know, 2-3 years. 2-3 years? Are you kidding me? I mean, at a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 2-3 years is like,
it's earth-shattering.
Yeah. So, but,
maybe hitting puberty by then.
Yeah. So then I see Raiders and it's just like, for me, Harrison Ford was just it. I mean, he was just the movie star. So I would see anything he was in and he just could do no wrong. Now you look at him, he's kind of a curmudgeon old man, but I mean.
Still an action hero.
Still an action hero.
He's still like rescuing people in his helicopter.
Right.
On occasion.
I mean, crazy. But yeah. So did you guys Raiders? How did you guys feel
that's definitely in my top. Like, there's some list that have, that's definitely in the top of the list, I think. But yeah, I mean, the thing I loved about Raiders of the Lost Ark was that my mother saw it before I did.
Okay.
And she came back and reported, because this was back in the day when my mother still felt she needed to screen everything I saw before I saw it, and she came back and said, well, it was good. It was, the action kind of never stopped. And I guess that was a novel thing at the time, like an action movie was like, I don't know, I guess you had like the French Connection or,
right.
Something, but there were periods of, plot.
Yeah.
There was character development, things like that. And Raiders had all of that, but it was really in the context of, we're still running for our life here, or we're chasing something, or we're being chased.
Yeah.
Or, there's snakes.
Why did it have to be snakes?
Yeah. Well, being the old man of the group, I was 17 when
it's not a high bar
when I saw Raiders, and aside from the fact that the movie itself stood out, the experience was really good because I was doing dinner theater at the time, and somebody suggested that a bunch of us get together and go see the movie. So it was probably the first time I had gotten together with a large group of people I was having fun with, and then went out to do something that ended up making the evening even more fun because the movie was so incredible. So it also, aside from the fact that the movie itself was an experience, the whole night was an experience that stuck with me. So, that was part of the reason why it's significant. But like you said, it hit all those points of the classic serial cliffhanger adventure movies, had the kind of hero that olden style hero that, especially in the early 80s, we were still, like you're saying, French Connection, things like that. It might have been one of the first movies of that time where it was a little more, the hero was a little more heroic instead of anti-heroic. This was not a cynical movie.
Right.
It was kind of, might have been the times, thing coming out of the 70s and Watergate, et cetera. We were kind of back on an upswing in the mood of the nation, and this reflected that in that it was exciting and hopeful and not everything sucks and the hero has to be gritty and super flawed. So
and they were fighting Nazis.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that. Right?
Back when that was still a thing that you did.
Yeah, right.
That was...
Oh, and we're back to depressing.
Well, see, the other thing for me too, I think, kind of looking back on it, my interpretation of like an older movie too. So like I told you, I see the commercials and it looks like an older movie, right? Well, when we were kids, like younger kids, my parents, wanted to, kind of introduce us to some of the classics that they would have, or they called it. And, so every Saturday night, we would do like a family movie night, and they would always, pick movies. They picked like My Fair Lady or West Side Story, Oklahoma, some of those like classics, right?
All musicals.
Yeah, all musicals, right? So, you're a kid. It's like, they were, I remember them. I remember that time more fondly than the movies themselves. Like just that the idea of family was a little bit more, something that I kind of took from it. But because of that as my context, and then kind of seeing the commercials, I had an incorrect assumption as to what my expectation was going to be, going into seeing Raiders. And so
you kept waiting for him to break out in song.
Correct. And he didn't. And that was disappointing to this day.
I would like a Throw Me the Idol, I'll Give You the Whip little duet.
Oh, okay. Now there's a musical that has to happen.
I know.
How has Broadway never done this?
Right.
They can do Harry Potter. Why not Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes.
Now, here's trivia. I know you guys both know the answer to this. In that first scene, what actor that later became famous was in that scene?
Alfred Molina.
Thank you.
One of my heroes.
That's right. That's Doc Ock from Spider-Man
Yes,
2.
and that's. I was thinking about that. That's a conversation I'm going to have at length sometime about how genius he was as Doc Ock.
Right. Yeah. Very, very
Yeah,
good.
very, very young Alfred Molina. And I'm trying to think of... Karen Allen was fresh off of something in that movie,
Animal
too.
House.
Well, yeah, she was in Animal House.
Well, that wasn't
right?
fresh off of. That was probably... Was that 76?
Yeah, but what are the other
No,
things?
you know
She
what?
did the
It was
Glass
sort of
Menagerie, I
around
think.
the same time, I think. It was within... I think it was maybe, 76 or something. I think I was around 13 when I saw Animal House, because I believe that is the movie that put me into puberty. And then, like I said, I was 17.
Speaking of influential films...
Yeah.
I think
That's a nice segue.
That's a subcategory. I think for me it was weird science.
Yeah.
Kelly LeBrock in a bikini.
Yes. Well, so that's really my most influential. So for me, that I would have to say it was Raiders. I mean, there's others that have come and gone since, like I said, but for me, that was the one that really kind of spearheaded it.
I'm going to make you really jealous here for a minute. 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to take a vacation to Hawaii, which is something I never get the chance to do because I'm a poor individual.
Yeah.
But I went to the island of Kauai, which was it's famously a place where a lot of movies have been filmed. Like every Jurassic movie has been made there.
Right.
Like Tony Curtis used to film there. Elvis used to film there. The opening scene from Fantasy Island, that waterfall is there. I've stood underneath that waterfall from the opening scene of Fantasy Island, you know.
Oh, no way.
The pilot episode of Gilligan's Island was filmed there. There's so much stuff that was filmed there.
Side note, you know what kind of M&M's tattoo likes, right?
The plain ones. The plain ones. Yes. But
We can edit things out, right?
yes. All the cultural appropriation and racism.
I'm not going to be in this thing, am I?
It was the setting for Lilo and Stitch.
Oh, wow.
Like animated film. There's the iconic lighthouse in there that's animated in Lilo and Stitch, but I've been to the actual lighthouse. It exists.
That's kind of cool.
Some scenes from Pirates of the Caribbean were filmed there. And also, as it turns out, it makes a really good backdrop for a Amazon type of setting that may have just shown up in the opening scenes of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
What?
That's where they filmed that.
Get out. Are you
It
serious?
was the island of Kauai.
Interesting.
I did not know
And that classic opening where you see the Paramount logo fading into a mountain, that mountain is on the island of Kauai. And somewhere I have a little cell phone shot of me standing in front of that mountain that I have faded out from the Paramount logo.
No way.
Standing, you pull over on the side of the road, you step out of your car, and it's right there. That's the angle that they used right there from the car. So I'm just standing on the side of the road filming myself in front of the Raiders of the Lost Ark Paramount mountain.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was a really cool moment for me. Nice. So I figured that you would have loved that trip.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, and they'll charge you like $120 to like take a bus ride, and they'll give you lunch, and they'll just drive you around in this bus to all the different locations that were filmed. And I went, screw that, I'm going to save the money. I just got on Google and I researched everything that had ever been filmed there and where on the island it was. And it's not a big island. You can get from one end to the other in 45 minutes, right? And I just took my family, I loaded them in the car, and it's like, all right, I got a whole itinerary, let's go. And we drove around to every single movie location. We showed like the big, huge taro fields, which make really good rice patties and stuff like Uncommon Valor and Tropic Thunder, which were filmed there. There was the village still exists from the opening scene of the movie Outbreak. They have a sort of African village set up, the one that they nuke in the beginning of that film. That's still there.
No way.
Lots of stuff. And it's, if you love movies, go to the island of Kauai. You're welcome, Hawaii, for the tourism plug.
We're preparing for when we get advertisers.
Hawaii tourism. This episode of Movie Files.
I'll answer next because I suspect, Steve, you probably have a more satisfying response than I do.
For context, Stephon is the one who's always going to bring it down.
Oh, yeah.
He's our resident cynic.
Well, only in that I think when
Everything's terrible when you're...
No. When you proposed the topic, I think I misinterpreted it a little bit. I was thinking of it as the movie that influenced me most in general, rather than influenced me to love movies.
Yeah.
So,
but I think you can take it any way.
Okay. Well, I can answer both of them. Sort of. I couldn't think of what influenced me most in terms of a single movie, because there's so many movies that influenced me in different ways. Mm-hmm. There's movies that influenced my worldview. There's movies that influenced my sense of comedy, story structure, things of that nature. So I didn't have one movie that fit that. I could go down a list of movies that influenced me in different ways. I'm not sure that's all that interesting, though.
Oh, I go for it.
Yeah, okay. Totally. Probably the thing I'm most aware of is ones that influenced my sense of comedy, style, and comic timing. Mm-hmm. Movies like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Airplane. What else? I had a whole bunch that I thought of last night. I'm also the one who doesn't write things down. So,
Airplane was a turning stone. I think that to me was kind of a step forward in comedic filmmaking.
Yes. The absurdity of it was something I hadn't seen before, and it kind of opened my eyes to a whole other style of comedy.
I actually described this to someone last night. I was talking about this movie last night to someone, and I described it as a masterclass of literal comedy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Of taking something literally and how absurd that is in most situations that you're going to find yourself in.
Yeah, it's a good point. Pretty much anything by Buster Keaton definitely influenced my sense of comic timing and physical comedy. More modern things like Dodgeball. I love a movie, especially a comedy, that I can watch again and again and catch different things that I missed the first time. Yeah. And that's definitely one where there's just little moments put in there that I hadn't caught, or moments that just stand out as unexpected, that were just hilarious.
I actually have Dodgeball listed as one of my favorite sports films.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can see that.
Because it follows that trope. It follows that genre.
Yes, exactly. In terms of the movie that influenced me for loving movies, probably Star Wars. Yeah. There were definitely movies that I saw before that had an effect on me. But if I look back, that was, like you said with Raiders, that was the first movie that I saw multiple times in the theater. I, paid to see it 10 different times in the theaters. That was the first movie that I stood in line for 3 hours to get tickets for. And it was shot differently than anything I had seen before. It has that same quality as Raiders, where it kind of calls back to older movies, right, but modernizes it in a certain way. One of the things that I enjoy about it is it wasn't until the third time I saw it that I realized that there was any comedy in it.
Really?
Because going into it, I was a huge Star Trek fan, etc., and to me, science fiction was a serious subject, Right. It was dramatic and scientific, and I went to see this expecting, you got characters like Darth Vader. This is very clearly a serious movie, and I remember sitting there the first time I saw it. It was for my birthday. My mother took me and a bunch of friends to see it at the Uptown Theater, and we're sitting there, and there's that scene where there's the firefight going on at the opening of the movie, and C-3PO and R2-D2 cross the hallway through all these blaster shots without getting hit. And my mother laughed, and I turned to her and I shushed her. Why are you laughing at this movie?
Serious movie.
And then like the third time I saw it, I saw that scene and I'm like, oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then appreciated that it was doing so much more. Right. Like I said, the storytelling, the transitions between scenes, the fact that they would have wipes and things like that I hadn't seen before. It was something I had never seen before. So
now, we've already admitted you're the oldest one here.
Yeah.
So 77 is when Star Wars.
77.
I never saw that in the theater. So I saw Empire in the theater.
Right.
I was 7, so my parents just thought I was maybe a little too young to see it. So I saw it later on video. But so you were how old?
13.
Okay, so you're 13. So that's as a 13-year-old.
It was the perfect time. Yeah,
I was 6.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you and I are pretty close in age, but yeah, similar to Raiders. It's like I'm about the same age. So yeah, that's like preteen to teen, like where it's just like you're really just starting to kind of find yourself.
You were the target audience.
Absolutely. And one of the things that is a fun memory of that is maybe a year, maybe 2 years before, there was, at one of the local high schools, they had the outtakes from Star Trek, all the Star Trek blooper reels. So, a whole bunch of people show up, sit in the auditorium, and they're showing the blooper reels, and it was sponsored by some company, we didn't know what, and in the middle of everything, they're like, okay, well, there's this new movie coming out next summer, and we're going to show you a few clips from it, and it's called Star Wars, and like, okay, whatever. And
you're thinking that is so derivative.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it didn't really show anything because they were still in post-production. So you see a little bit of, X-Wing fighters flying and space stuff, and maybe some robots. And you're like, oh, okay,
a Wookiee.
I don't even think they showed that. I mean, it really just seemed like kind of generic space opera movie. Right. So we saw that, we're like, that's great. Can we get back to William Shatner walking into turbo doors? That's what I'm here for.
Right.
So then to see the movie and go, oh my God, this is that thing that they were telling us about, and kind of feel like once Star Wars became this huge thing, it's like, I was part of this small group of people that got to find out about it before everybody else. And
that's really cool.
And didn't have an appreciation for it. But,
right.
But yeah, so that was definitely something that really fostered my love of movies and made me willing to stand in line for 3 hours to see other things.
Yeah.
And then make that mistake again for when Phantom Menace came out. But once again, that's me bringing it down.
We all did, yeah. I think it's important to note that despite the slight age difference,
we're all in the same.
We're all of the Star Wars generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is absolutely a thing. I think you could look at that's Gen X, or according to who is it, CNBC or whatever. It's like the missing generation. Right. But whatever. But we could very accurately be described as the Star Wars generation.
Definitely,
I think. And if I'm going to be looking at most influential movies, I would have to piggyback on that. And if I had to choose one, that would absolutely be it. Because even at 6 years old, when I first saw it, it changed my life.
Sure.
That movie informed how I looked at storytelling. It's how I looked at action and character. It informed my thoughts on good versus evil and made me start realizing maybe it's not always so black and white, even though it was very literally black and white in that movie. But the bad guys were wearing the white. It was kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah, that's true.
I actually had this conversation with my father a while back about that because my father was a consummate moviephile himself. But when he asked me what my favorite movie was, and I was, a lot younger, I said at the time, it was Star Wars, no question. And he said, really? It was just a Western. And I had to think about that for a second. It's like, wow, okay, it really kind of was. And then I looked into it a little bit more, and it's like, it was a Western, except it was a Western that was a ripoff of a Kurosawa film. Right. This is a samurai film that is also a Western, that is also a space opera. So, when you look at the plot structure of it, there's not really anything new there. It's,
not at all.
Young boy hero becoming a knight, saving a princess from a castle. That's about as generic a fantasy plot as you can possibly get. But the way they did it and how they introduced the Force and made you start questioning, like, what is faith? What is spirituality? There's deeper questions that started to come out of that. And then, of course, Empire Strikes Back came out, and as my father said, legitimized the franchise. Which is, I think, was a good way of putting it.
That's slight tangent, but a lot of people have the same opinion that Empire was the best of the original trilogy. And I agree, as a movie, it was the best. I still like Star Wars better than Empire. If I had a choice to watch the two, I would rather watch Star Wars. But
Star Wars built the world.
Yes. Yeah.
It established the universe.
And there were tonal changes in Empire and structural changes and story changes, like the whole Darth Vader being Luke's father thing, that I hate. And
Really?
well, it clearly wasn't there in the first movie.
Oh no, it's that I like George Lucas likes to claim that was the plan all along, but no,
That's crap.
no,
That's
it
crap.
totally wasn't.
So, maybe it was just the simplicity of Star Wars. Like you're saying, it is a fairly straightforward classic story, hero story. And I would rather watch that, I think, than Empire, even though just if in terms of movie quality, Empire's a better movie. Mm-hmm. But I prefer Star Wars.
See, I think part of it too with Empire, two things I think spearheads why that is considered, the best or, whatever.
Right.
I think at that time, they really weren't movies that, were there really trilogies back then? I feel like they were the original
franchises
trilogy.
didn't really exist so much.
To the point where, there was a continuation that happened. Like they left you on a cliffhanger, literally.
That was so groundbreaking.
Right?
At the time.
And so
that was unheard of.
I think that lent itself to it. And I also think part of it is because Empire is very Han centric, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. He gets a lot more screen time in it. They're developing the chemistry and the relationship with Leia a little bit more. And, Luke, who, I think he's grown into being a pretty decent actor. And I know he does a lot of voice stuff now, Mark Hamill. But at the time, I think he was
an ingenue.
Yeah.
He was kind of the stone-faced ingenue at the time.
Yeah.
Right. So I feel like, having him take a little bit of a back seat to Harrison Ford, just I think lent itself as well. But I would almost agree with you, Stephon, that from an enjoyment factor standpoint, I agree. I think the original Star Wars, I think I would probably edge out over Empire. They're very close. Right. And at the time when I saw Return of the Jedi, I remember being so excited to see that when it came out. You know what I mean? Yeah. I remember I was getting out of school early to go see it. Yeah. We were talking about standing in line and doing all that. And the first, was it half hour of it, when they're saving Han, was just fantastic. Yeah, right. If they could just end the movie,
fight, man.
Right? If they could just end that movie before they got to Endor, and so the Ewoks showed up, maybe it would have changed.
The funny thing is,
bit.
at the time, the Ewoks didn't bother me at all, and the Ewok dance party at the end didn't bother me. In fact, I prefer that to the revision of it with the celebration all over the galaxy.
That's true.
That was nothing. But yes, looking back, there's lots of aspects of Jedi that are a little silly, but I don't know.
Well, who did not have a fantasy about Princess Leia in the gold bikini? Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
That might have been a little bit life changing too.
Yes,
being 13, and
it absolutely was.
Okay. That's interesting.
I feel like I'm in this small camp of people who thinks that Jedi gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
And a lot of that falls on the Ewoks, sure. I can understand why he did it, though, because originally they were supposed to be Wookiees.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the original idea was that because he wanted a sort of primitive race overpowering this massive technological empire.
Okay. But
over the course of the trilogy, Chewbacca, the character of Chewbacca, kind of established that Wookiees were not really all that primitive. Mm-hmm. This guy was a co-pilot of a starship.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he was capable of having perfectly intelligent conversations that, only a select few people could understand, but he had a lot of higher concepts going on. He had to introduce something that could conceivably eat people because they didn't know what they were, because they were that primitive. And so I understand why he did that. But even if you take that out of the equation, if you take out that they were kind of childish in their execution, and you just look at some of the broader things that they did in Jedi, that final throne room battle between Vader and Luke Skywalker with the Empire, the Emperor sitting there, Emperor Palpatine's goading them on. Yeah, that is some beautiful stuff there. That is a real internal struggle moment where, I found myself sitting in the theater going, I'm feeling sympathy for Darth Vader. What's going on here?
Yes.
And that became this internal struggle with me. And you started to realize what the Emperor is doing to Luke and how Luke is starting to fall for it. And you're like, oh, this is not this is not classic good versus evil here. You're starting to see a broader context here. And the moment when Darth Vader finally turns on Palpatine, there were cheers in the theater. Yeah. People were on their feet.
I do remember that.
And that was like a spine-chilling moment for me. I was like, wow, that was really something.
Yeah.
And it really kind of legitimized the whole trilogy for me. So despite some of the obvious flaws that Jedi had, I think they really ended that trilogy on a really big high note because of that.
No, and I agree. And I mean, look, it's all in context of the other two. I mean, you're saying it's the least enjoyable of the three, but the first two are on, this high bar, and this one just comes in just underneath it. I mean, as a trilogy, it's almost unmatched, because as much as Raiders is my, most influential movie, it is still my all-time favorite movie. The subsequent movies did not hold up. I mean, at the time I saw Temple of Doom, I thought it was unbelievable, but that's one of those that we talked about earlier where it does not hold up upon future viewings. Now, Last Crusade kind of made up for a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think regardless of any of the flaws in the original Star Wars trilogy, it's a strong trilogy. Mm-hmm. Raiders, I hated Temple of Doom.
Yeah. You were also older than me too.
I was a little bit
in 84,
older.
You're now what, 20?
19. I was 19. Okay. I didn't like it at all. It was completely contrary to everything that they had established in the first movie in terms of the overall tone of it. And then Last Crusade, I liked quite a bit. I thought they got back more to the original feeling of it while still developing it. But interesting side note, that summer you were mentioning, I guess before we started recording, mentioning Gremlins. Gremlins and Temple of Doom came out the same summer.
Oh, wow.
They were the movies specifically that were responsible for the PG-13 rating.
Yeah, that's right.
I even remember sitting in the theater going, wow, these are PG movies? Because this is pretty
that thing
violent
just exploded in the
gross.
microwave.
yeah. And then that's why they...
Well, the original Jaws is PG.
Yeah.
And I mean...
A severed head floating around.
Yeah. I mean, you look at that. There's no way I want my kids to see that movie. But yeah, I remember that. I remember that those two movies came out same year, and it was... there was so much backlash that's what really prompted. Now, do you remember what the very first PG-13 movie was?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Night of the Comet.
I think it's Red Dawn.
Was it?
Ah. You have to do a fact check.
I'll do a fact check.
Stephan's our resident fact checker.
Night of the Comet was the first one that I saw. Yeah. And I remember thinking, wow, they just dropped an F-bomb in this movie. And I was kind of shocked.
You get one, right?
Yeah, you get one. You get one.
Wait.
It is Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. You nailed it.
August 10th, 1983.
Can you edit in some sort of sound effect?
I will. You'll get all the fanfare.
It became the first ever PG-13 movie to be released in theaters.
Wow. Okay.
Useless information. That's why. That's why.
Well, I'm glad, because Night of the Comet was a terrible movie.
Yeah, it
really was. Really bad. But I would not have been surprised if it was Temple of Doom also.
Yeah.
That they made it specifically. I think they made it specifically because of that movie, but it wasn't actually PG-13.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. It was PG, and they were like, oh, wait.
No, it may have slipped up.
Temple of Doom.
Which is so funny, because
Gremlins.
Nowadays PG-13 is like the PG when we were kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
PG-13 is like, it's like cartoonish violence.
Yeah.
Now.
I find myself, having three young kids, they'll, stuff on FX or, all those stations that a Transformers movie or whatever's playing, and I don't think anything about it, because I know they're going to edit out the language and any of the sexual stuff, but I'm thinking, oh, no big deal. And then it's when my oldest, my 7-year-old, is saying, Daddy, I don't know if I should be watching this. I'm just sitting there watching. And they're killing each other and shooting people. And I'm just like, oh yeah, no,
this is probably a bit
intense. SpongeBob.
Because that's completely nonviolent.
I know. I could go figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, well, when you think about Tom and Jerry cartoons when we were kids, oh my God.
Roadrunner?
Oh yeah.
The Acme Company?
So violent. So incredibly violent.
I have to tangent off real quick, because it made me think of it when you were talking about Return of the Jedi, and then what you were saying about how the revisionist history of changing things, it was my plan all along. No,
right.
to have him be his father. How about Leia being the sister? And I never forget the moment when he tells her, and she goes, somehow I always knew.
Especially when my tongue was down your throat.
And the whole audience
in the
is
med bay.
You?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There has been a recent, I think the pendulum has swung back recently. I've seen people saying, hey, don't be so hard on George Lucas. He created this franchise that everybody loves. No, yes, that is true. He did. And then he went completely crazy and did all this stuff that is so ridiculous and just kind of spits in the face of what he created.
Yeah.
Sadly, I can point to the moment where he started going downhill, and it's a really tragic story.
Oh, when his
his son was killed.
Yeah.
When his son was killed, that was a big.
I don't remember that one.
It was a boating accident.
I was going to say car, but yeah, boating.
Yeah, but that hit him pretty hard. But also when he and Spielberg got together for the Twilight Zone movie, there was a horrible tragedy on the set of that film, and it scarred both of them for life.
That's understandable.
Didn't there was an actor that
Vic
died.
Morrow.
Vic Morrow, that's right.
And
two
children.
children who should not have been on set at that point.
Yeah,
there was
a
issue.
stunt involving a helicopter that went very, very badly, and there were decapitations and
partial decapitations.
Yeah, it was awful. It was really bad. Awful. It was all caught on film, and it was terrible. And that was the moment where George Lucas he took a hiatus,
which I understand, but
long hiatus, and then the next thing he did finally years later was Howard the Duck. To put it in perspective,
Okay.
But the thing is, though, that yes, I understand how that has an effect, but I'm not sure I can tie that to the changes he made, because some of it was just ridiculous stuff, like Leia saying that, Luke saying, do you remember our mother? And she says, vaguely, we were very young. It's like, so you remember, being
minutes old.
And, just stuff that you established, and then to just kind of crap on it and going, I don't want to do it. No, R2-D2 could fly all the time. He just never did it later on, and crap like that.
I think there is such
lazy.
a thing as people reaching a point where they get hung up in their own mythos. Yeah. I recently had this conversation with someone about Gene Roddenberry having done the same thing. And actually, if I kind of piggybacked on, Star Wars being the most influential thing, but if I can go back and go back to Star Trek,
right?
I think that's something that I could absolutely say was Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big one. And at the time, I didn't really feel that way because I was still riding off of Star Wars and I wasn't that familiar with Star Trek. I'd seen, the classic show in syndication on television. I thought, this is kind of fun, but I was still too young to really understand some of the higher concepts that they were bringing into that show. Right. And then Wrath of Khan came out and I was like, whoa, that movie's pretty intense. I like it. It's not Star Wars though. And and it took me a while to really develop a better appreciation for it. And then as subsequent viewings occurred later on in life, I started to realize this movie's brilliant. And recently, this is the level of geek I am. I recently got a hold of a copy of the screenplay for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and I transcribed the entire thing into Shakespearean iambic pentameter because I wanted to do my own Shakespeare version of something, and I discovered it was shockingly easy.
Wow, really?
And what I learned, the more I learned about Shakespeare, I'm a very Shakespeare-trained individual. I have a large theater background. I've done a lot of Shakespeare in my career as an actor. But the more I studied that script and did a deep dive on it, the more I realized this is just a Shakespearean tragedy.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 5-act structure, typical Shakespearean tragedy. If you look at the character of Khan as the central figure, this story is basically the rise and fall of Khan. It's a straight-up revenge story. It follows a perfect Shakespearean 5-act structure, which has been sort of condensed into a 3-act structure, which is very popular in Hollywood. But everything about it follows that kind of pattern. And so transcribing it in iambic pentameter, generally things become a lot more grandiose and powerful and epic when you do that. But it really wasn't that much of a stretch.
Especially for Khan. Yeah, you don't have to.
Especially for Khan.
Have to
He's
change those
already
lines
quoting a lot of, he's quoting Melville all over the place. And
Right,
Charles Dickens is quoted a lot in that movie. There is some Shakespearean stuff that happens in there. He has this whole speech of I shall chase you around the moons of Nibia and to that Hellstrom. He's big and epic in everything that he says. And I started really thinking that was kind of a perfectly written film. And you can debate all day long about, the greater meaning of people who had a connection to these characters and just like losing their minds when Spock dies,
Right.
or William Shatner's epic acting during the eulogy for Spock, which is another moment. There are some moments there where you're like, okay,
Human, which is spelled U-M''N.
Human. There's a lot of different takeaways you can have there, but the actual script itself, and it went through pretty much the same process as any Hollywood script, which is you have someone create a first draft of it, then it goes to the writing room, and then there's other a lot of people have their hand in it, but what they wound up with was something where there was not a wasted scene in that movie. There really isn't. If you look at it, everything had a purpose, everything had a direction. It was really, really well crafted. And, you can look at it in terms of the synopsis, which is, Kirk discovers an old nemesis who tries to take over this powerful weapon of mass destruction, and a fight ensues. And yeah, all of that's true. That's ignoring the fact that it is a huge commentary on mortality and aging specifically. It is a real commentary on the
whole
struggle with your getting older and losing your purpose, losing your relevance, losing your edge, but also in how you cope with grief and loss and death. And, the whole thing was leading up to the point of him having to deal with Spock sacrificing himself. And the idea that it opens with the infamous Kobayashi Maru test, and where they point out it's like, no, you've never actually faced death. You've cheated death this whole time. You even figured out a way to cheat this one test, the whole purpose of which is how do you handle a no-win situation where you have to cut your losses. And then you realize that you look back, it's like, yeah, he's never really, he's had some terrible deaths in his past. He's had a lot of loved ones that have had some very tragic ends, but he's never really confronted it. And that was the whole point of this movie. It's like, it's a real allegory about grief and loss and aging. And the more I delved into that movie, the more I realized there are so many thematic elements that you could talk about forever about that movie. So I think, for the purpose of this podcast, having already talked about Raiders and Star Wars and everything, I think
may
that's
sound
going to
like
be the one
we've gone on a half-hour tangent, but actually,
that was a very influential movie for me. I think. I think maybe not necessarily my favorite movie of all time, because that's a pretty broad category. And if we're going to go with something that's really influential, that didn't necessarily happen until I was 30, when The Lord of the Rings came out. That whole trilogy, and I look at that trilogy, those three movies, nothing with Hobbit in the title, but the first three that Peter Jackson did, I look at that as one movie. I look at that as one 12-hour long movie or whatever. Long ass movie. But yeah, I look at it as one thing, and I look at it as something that was perfectly crafted. It's the kind of thing where you don't get that level of detail in films. You just don't. And the craftsmanship that went into that film, and everyone, I thought there were some career high performances from a number of people in that. The directing was something that was done with a level of love that you just do not see from people ever. The technical and artistic direction of that, there were easily 3,000 people that worked on any one of those films at any time. And they were doing things like set construction and building those bigatures that they had. They were working on things like forced perspective and CGI, and cutting edge CGI, and just the color of the movie. There were easily a couple thousand people on that movie, all of whom were delivering the best work of their career. Yeah. And to have all of that happening in one project and at the same time is a true rarity in film, I think. So I would be remiss if I didn't include that as one of the most influential movies.
Yeah, they're classic. Now, if I recall, the Twin Towers and Return of the King filmed back to back. Did they do all three?
They did.
They did all three together? I thought the first one they did, and then they were filming.
It was a 2.5-year shoot.
Okay, so they went
That's not including
consecutive.
pre-production, post-production. That was just the filming.
And that was consecutive. Okay, I couldn't remember if the first one was tied into it. I do remember specifically that the last two were consecutive.
And they didn't even really. I mean, all films are kind of made out of order.
Right.
You go in as much order as you can just for the consistency of the performance and for the actor's sake and everything. But sometimes you just have to, we're going to go off and film this scene that doesn't happen till the end of the movie. Like we're just, you do things out of order. I think the last scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark that they filmed actually was that truck explosion in Cairo.
Really?
Yeah, where he thinks Marion's just been blown up.
Yep.
I think that was the last shot they did in the entire film because it was a big stunt.
Oh, wow.
It was a big effect.
Yeah.
And I think that was the last thing they filmed. They went back and did it. They'd already filmed most of those scenes, but they had to go back and do that particular sequence.
But real quick on that, sorry, I just thought of another thing with Raiders that I loved because it was in that whole section. Remember the scene when all the big fighting right before it blows up and they're running around the streets.
Oh, this is classic trivia. I know where
you're going with
yeah.
this, right? So the crowd parts and it's the big guy and he's got the big sword. He's doing all this and he's just staring at him. You think it's going to be this big knife and whip fight and then he just pulls out the gun and shoots him, right?
Yeah, right.
Classic moment. But if I'm getting my trivia correct, there was supposed to be something planned.
Yeah.
There's a big sword fight.
Right, and he ended up, was it Ford?
Harrison
He had
Ford.
something like dysentery or something.
He had the flu or dysentery.
Yeah.
He was just,
He was in bad shape.
And apparently just said, can we just try something?
Yeah.
Now, see, this is one of those things where I think there's a little bit of truth and a little bit of mythos in there. The story I've always heard is he was sick and he was like, can we just try something? And they were like, sure. And they start the scene and the guy does his big thing with the scimitar and Harrison Ford pulls out the gun and shoots him and the guy just falls down and none of it was planned. I'm like, that sounds great.
Right.
The truth is, can we try something? Let's try this.
Yeah.
Here's my idea. They're like,
But either way, I mean, it's a good story and it was a fantastic scene.
And that was one of the few parts of Temple of Doom that I really liked was in that towards the end when he runs up and he sees them and there's two of them with the knives and he does the whole smirk, Harrison Ford smirk goes and it's not there.
And
the
gun's missing.
And then he goes and he actually does it.
It's a nice callback.
It was a great callback.
Yeah.
And that scene in Raiders, for something that was not planned, became one of the most iconic scenes in movie history.
Right.
And in terms of influential films, I have kind of a checklist of things that I look for in a film to decide whether this is a good movie or a legendary movie, a great movie, something that's really going to stand the test of time. And one of those check boxes that I have is how many truly iconic moments are there in this? How many moments that are going to make you really go, wow, that was something, or that was a great line, or that sent chills up my spine, or this is something I'm going to remember later. And I think all of the movies that we talk about are just filled with those moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And going back to Lord of the Rings, that was something that the reason I chose that as like one of my favorites of all time and one of the most influential was that I could have had just a list of nothing but iconic moments and saying, there's one. By the time they got to the Return of the King, I counted at least a dozen moments like that in that movie. And of course that was wrapping up a lot of like a big, long story arc at that point.
Yeah.
But there were so many moments in there that just took my breath away as far as that was concerned. Just to give you an example, and it's not even necessarily something anybody would think of right off the top of their head when they think of those movies. But there's the moment when, Gondor has all of the orc army on its front gates and they're in real trouble and they're trapped in this fortress built inside of a mountain and they realize this could be the end of all things for them. And, their steward of the city is not doing his job because he's been influenced by the Dark Lord, and everything's just completely unorganized and Gandalf is trying to organize people and it's just not happening. But he finally says, go light the fires, signal the rest of the country. And they get this big torch and they have to sneak and do it, because they're under orders from the steward of the city not to, but they finally light this thing. And then you see another mountaintop where someone says, the fire is lit. And they go and they light their fire. And then there's this long sweeping sequence where you just see these bonfires springing up on mountaintops everywhere, all for miles across the land. And you realize this is like an early warning system that's been in place maybe for centuries, and they've never used it. And then finally it gets all the way to Rohan, who's kind of at odds with Gondor, and they say the fires are lit. And there's this moment of, they've already decided they're going to let him die. But then the king goes, and we will answer. And a huge iconic moment for me. And I feel like that movie was just filled with those. The character of, Eowyn, like pulling the helmet off her head and saying, I am no man. Just lots of moments like that are just stand up and cheer moments. I think I have a typical problem with the Oscars, which that's a topic for a whole other
we don't have
podcast, I think. But when that movie came out and The Fellowship of the Ring was nominated for so many different things, the first movie in that trilogy, and A Beautiful Mind, I think, was the one that won everything that year. And it's like, I don't have a problem with that. I love Ron Howard as a director. I thought A Beautiful Mind was a great movie. I felt like they shafted Fellowship of the Ring badly. And
McKellen was supposed to win supporting actor and was nominated, but I'm
but also I think they
lost
snubbed Sean Bean, who delivered a fantastic performance in the Fellowship of the Ring. He wasn't even nominated for anything. But I mean, I could talk for years about that specifically. But Fellowship of the Ring won just a couple of technical awards. Two Towers was nominated for Best Picture, didn't win anything. Then Return of the King came around, was nominated for, 13 to 18 Oscars or something like that, and won every single one of them. And I started realizing, okay, they were saving up. They knew, they decided 3 years ago that they were going to wait to hold all the accolades until the last film had come out. And that to me was like, that's kind of crappy. That's just playing politics. That's not really paying attention to the quality of something.
Do you think they thought that all the way through? Because I mean, like,
it felt that way.
Because Godfather, won Best Picture. Godfather 2 won Best Picture. Best Picture. Godfather 3 we don't have to talk about. But I mean, those two films both won Best Picture.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not like they couldn't have acknowledged it. I think it was ridiculous that it didn't get more. I'm trying to remember what was nominated that year, in particular, but I agree that it kind of saving it, because I liked Return of the King a lot. I kind of lean towards Fellowship as my favorite of the three.
Fellowship is an amazing movie.
I mean, just phenomenal.
It's an incredible movie.
And I don't want to, I know I'm risking, angering you.
Don't tempt my wrath.
I know, right? First of all, you said a lot of ore names that I couldn't remember. Andor, Semnor, whatever they were. But, you guys are going to have to fact check those. I don't really know, their names.
I think one of those is a cholesterol medicine. I'm thinking
that's
it.
Crestor.
Yeah. Summon Crestor.
That's right. We need a 30-second disclaimer on what it'll do to you. My one beef with Return of the King was the multiple false endings.
Oh yeah, and I think
so. I'm not the only one, right?
Oh, no, I remember hearing that.
I think in any great film, you can always find stuff that's going to be nitpicky or wrong, or even not so nitpicky, even glaring. Like we've already mentioned with Return of the Jedi. That was a great film. It had a lot of its own problems.
Right.
And I think you can look at any film that way. And they're all fair criticism. For sure.
Yeah, it didn't take away from my loving the movie, but I think it being such a long movie and such a long trilogy, we're getting to it, and then it just, you want that moment of feeling like,
now it's over.
Now it's over, right? Another person, by the way, that I thought was shafted out of getting a nomination was Sean Astin.
Oh boy,
specifically in the last one.
That was his greatest role ever, barring none.
Did I tell you I met him?
I think you did.
Yeah. I did a weird independent movie called Everything's Wonderful, and the director was trying to shop it around to festivals and stuff. We had a screening out in Baltimore or something, and I mean, it didn't end up going anywhere, but at the time, somehow he became friends with Sean Astin, and Sean Astin was going to back him on something, and they were going to do a bigger version of it, and he was going to play my character, and I actually met him at a party, and he was like super nice and down to earth and everything, and then nothing ever happened of it, like everything. But
to put it in context for our adoring viewers or listeners,
both of you,
yes, all two of you, we're based in the what do you call it? The Maryland, Virginia, D.C. area,
the DMV.
The DMV, and Sean Astin is the son of John Astin,
who lives in Baltimore.
I believe for a while he was a professor at Johns Hopkins, actually.
That might be. I don't know.
But
I like how you're giving everyone a synopsis on who Sean Astin is, but you just gloss right over Shondor and Dendor and you know who our audience is, right?
Yeah, well, and I did establish myself as the uber nerd of this group.
That is true. That is
you're Stephon here is the curmudgeonly old man.
I am.
I'm the unapologetic
and that was a great segue for me to mention, of the three of us, I did not like the Lord of the Rings trilogy
at all.
I didn't even finish it. I saw the first one in theaters and was pretty bored to death.
Okay.
And then
it's eventually,
the way I ended up enjoying that one is watched it at home with my wife, and we watched it over 3 nights in 1 hour chunks. Mm-hmm. And it was very digestible for me that way. But then I started to watch the second one. It was just like, I don't care. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that comes from, although I am a huge fan of sci-fi and fantasy, I also never liked the original books, the trilogy. I think
they are also a commitment.
Well, I think Tolkien's one of those people, like so many other famous writers, particularly these days, who's a great world builder. I mean, the stuff he came up with is amazing, but he's a crappy writer.
Yeah.
And when I first tried to read the trilogy when I was a teenager and couldn't get through it, and then I tried again as an adult, thinking maybe being older I'd be able to, and I stopped reading at the same point where they spent it felt like 500 pages walking through the woods, and nothing actually happened until 3 pages before they got out of the woods. And I was like, I can't, this is terrible writing.
When I read those books for the first time, I remember it was a good 100 pages in before anything actually happened.
Yeah.
I think it was 120 pages before they even left the Shire. Wow.
So,
wow, this is because there was so much to establish,
Which is to say, I never finished the trilogy. That said, I don't disagree with anything that you said about the movie. There was, in terms of the innovation and the acting and everything else that you mentioned, absolutely true.
He used film techniques in that hadn't been seen since Ray Harryhausen. And
you want to go ahead and tell him who that is? I don't know who that is.
Pioneer of stop motion animation. Did Sinbad, for example, like
the guy that
the
won
animated
the
skeletons,
the comedian.
Yeah. He did
the Jason and the Argonauts.
Okay.
The classic scene of the Cyclops on the beach.
Right. Nice.
The old stop motion photography, which a lot of if you like the AT-ATs in Empire Strikes Back on the planet Hoth, that big battle with the walkers, thank Ray Harryhausen, because that was the same techniques that he pioneered. And a lot of that with the advent of CGI. Now it's like we can do anything. We can do absolutely anything in film now. Oh, yeah. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because when you go back and you actually see something where they used real, genuine, well done practical effects, it's a world of difference.
I think movie makers are kind of, it's that pendulum again. When CGI first became viable and people were using it in movies, everybody was like, we can do anything we want with this, and we're going to use this for everything, for things we don't even need CGI for. We're going to do it. And
dogs,
I think there was
chasing people.
Yes.
Why do you need CGI dogs?
I think there was pushback on it, and there are more movies these days that are the ones that I really like, and I wish I could think off the top of my head of an example, but the ones that combine a little bit of CGI and practical effects, and they use each where they're the most effective, rather than relying on one or the other. And those ones, again, I wish I could think of something. I know there was something that came out within the last year that got attention for the fact that it used both practical and CGI. Maybe it'll come back to me, but it worked really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there were a couple of turning points with CGI that were really that I think gave people the wrong impression of how to make movies. Mm-hmm. And not that they were wrong in their initial use, because I think they were groundbreaking, but they gave people the idea that they could just use this technology and not have to pay as much attention while they were filming something, maybe. Mm-hmm. One of them was in Jurassic Park, which was kind of a laboratory for that technology. Where, I mean, it had already existed for quite some time, but they really figured out exactly how much they could do with it in that film. Yeah.
And that CGI still holds up.
Yeah,
and that was a movie where because CGI was just starting, they were still doing what I was just talking about, where it is a combination of computer generated and practical effects.
Yeah.
Used where each of them was most effective, and it worked.
But initially what they were using it for was like, we need to make this dinosaur look more real, or we need to make this action sequence work somehow when there are things that are just not there on set. Yeah. That I understood. But the moment I'm talking about is something that almost gets completely glossed over. There was a shot when they're trying to escape from the velociraptors inside the control room, and they escape through the ceiling. They climb this ladder up into the ceiling panels and everything, and somebody falls through, the girl falls through the vent. And in the shot, the way they shot it, they didn't realize this until way later. The stunt woman who was filling in for her, when she fell through the ceiling and they had the CGI dinosaur underneath her from the top down shot, the stunt woman looks directly into the camera. She looks up and looks directly into the camera, and there was no way they could mask the fact that it was not the actress. So they used CGI and superimposed the actress's face on top of the stunt woman. And that was one of the first times that had been done. And it was so seamless and so flawless that everybody went, oh, there was this big collective light bulb in Hollywood filmmakers where we can do this now.
And today we have come so far that we can take the faces of famous actresses and superimpose them over porn movies.
Yeah, now it's becoming kind of a terrifying technology. Yeah, and you can, and even not just in the porn industry, which is obviously like the big pioneer of that, but now there's this real concern of, I could end up in a movie that I didn't do. Mm-hmm. And, my image is being used, and there's this weird copyright law thing that there are a lot of questions with this technology going on right now. Right. But the other moment that I thought of that was really kind of the pioneer of that was the movie The Crow, where Brandon Lee died before they finished filming, and there were shots they had to get of him. Yep. So they took shots from other parts of the movie and flipped him to make him look a little bit different, and they inserted him in different parts of the film. And it was stuff like just him walking through a door and things like that. But it's stuff that he did not shoot. They used his image and they inserted it with CGI later.
Yeah, and most recently, the Fast and the Furious.
Right, with Paul Walker.
And they had his brothers stand in for him because similar body types, but then they
superimposed his
face.
Something that had not been attempted since Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Back then, they just used a piece of fabric over something.
Right. Yes, when Bela Lugosi died partway through filming.
Oh, what a delightfully bad movie.
If you haven't seen that, you got to see that, and also watch Ed Wood to get context for
I'm going to go ahead and spoil a future episode for us, I think, where we're going to tackle a topic of like best bad movies out there. I think that's something we have to address.
Agreed.
At some point.
Before we wrap up, though, I thought of it a while ago, but I wanted to kind of bring it back to this, but I think you were talking about, you were talking about a moment that, wasn't supposed to, it was the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was, it was supposed to be a big fight, a sword whip fight, and it ended up being the gun because of a circumstance.
Became an iconic moment.
How about, the most, in my opinion, and there are probably other ones that you could speak to, but to me, what I thought of when I thought of movies that became iconic almost by accident because of situations, and I'll give you the example I'm thinking of, Jaws, the original Jaws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They had this mechanical shark that was supposed to be, Bruce, that was supposed to be seen a lot more, but the damn thing wouldn't work. And so they ended up, Spielberg, by necessity, had to change his strategy and tactic to make it more of not seeing him, seeing the fin, and sort of the anticipation of it. And with that score and everything and the way it made it a classic, one of the best of all time.
Yeah.
And, I don't know your feeling. It's a horror movie. Okay.
Oh, it is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. There's no question, right? This is a horror movie. It's the scariest movie.
What else do people
I don't know. I don't, it's not like I've had these discussions with people, but I know that like sometimes people may not, it's almost like, it's not the same, but when people say Die Hard's not a Christmas movie or whatever, who cares?
But like, don't get me started.
I know. I kind of threw that out there for you. But like the fact that Jaws is one of the scariest movies, if not the scariest movie of all time. Like I to this day will not go in deep water.
I'm actually exactly the same. I don't go in open water because I can't see what's under there. And I know it is specifically because of seeing Jaws.
100%. I can tell you, as a kid, after seeing this movie, I don't remember how old I was, but I remember distinctly, right after seeing it, for several days afterwards, I would have to rationalize in my own bed that the shark couldn't get me. I remember thinking to myself, okay, so I'm at least 3 hours from the beach, and they can't live outside of water that long, and he doesn't have feet, so I don't know how he's going to travel.
Unless they're Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live.
Right. That's true.
Land shark. That's a real concern.
Yeah, it is true.
He
But
might show up.
I mean,
And I was
literally...
too young. How old were you when you saw Jaws?
Well, it was definitely later, so, I mean, because it came out in 76.
75.
75.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I was probably 10 years later. I mean, mid-80s, early to mid-80s. Saw it.
I want to say I was 10 when I saw it.
I was 11 when I saw it. And I was too damn young to have seen that movie in a theater.
Because it was rated PG, so
Well,
you could go.
but also, if you compare it to what's out now, it seems kind of tame by comparison.
Yeah, I guess.
It is by comparison, but I mean, at the time, it wasn't tame at all. I mean, that was...
Well, here's another thing.
I can give you sorry to interrupt you, but my son, 19 now, he probably saw Jaws when he was around the same age I was.
I was going to ask you about this.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah. He saw it. He probably was around 11 when he saw it. For me, the scene with the lifeguard's leg floating
to the
down,
bottom,
and then you realize that it's severed. That freaked me out when I first saw it. He saw it and was like, "What?" It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, the guy got eaten. What do you expect to happen?
Exactly. I mean, it did not have the same
Didn't have the
effect
same
on
effect.
him at all. Now, to put it in context, he also started watching horror movies earlier than I did, and he's not a big wuss like I am. He actually got me into watching horror movies. I didn't like horror movies. I didn't like being scared.
Oh, I seem to remember that about you.
Yeah, and because he already liked them, and this was only like maybe 5-6 years ago, I sat down, don't remember what the movie was, watched something with him, and just really enjoyed it and developed an appreciation for horror movies as a genre. And a well-made horror movie can be just a really good movie. So I love them now. But so, I mean, he also didn't go into it as sensitive as I did. But nevertheless, I think part of that is also a change in the times. You know, in 75, you didn't see realistic severed body parts, on screen with tissue hanging.
Night of the Living Dead?
True.
Okay, well, I had not seen that. But also that's zombies. Sharks, a giant shark that's bigger than anything that anybody has ever seen. That's plausible.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, that's what I was going to ask you, because you guys both, like, so your Liam is
He's 19 now.
and your daughter Allie is 17. So my oldest is 7.5.
Yeah, you have a different perspective.
I started a little later. So, but I can't, I'm dying for the moment when I can start introducing my kids to these classic movies. But my fear is that they're not going to love it as much as I do. And it's going to be such a disappointment.
That's going to be the fact.
It is. And
you know what?
That
was absolutely the fact with me. Fortunately, when my son was really little, I introduced him to Buster Keaton, and he loved it. If I tried later, he probably wouldn't, because he got into this thing where if it's a black and white movie, it's old and it's boring. Mm-hmm. But a big part of why he hasn't appreciated some of the stuff that I loved is because the pacing of movies has changed so much. Yeah, that's something that was Wrath of Khan, mentioned before, Steve, that, I loved that movie and I thought it was exciting and adventurous. He watched it and it was like, this is fine, but it's really slow.
It's a slow burn.
And I now watching older movies with him, I'm like, oh, this really is, and not just that specifically, but other movies that I enjoyed when they came out. I'm watching them now and I'm like, oh my God, all right, you established that. You don't need to go on for another 10 minutes. Just let's move on to the next thing. And it's just because, everything, but since we're talking about movies specifically, the pacing of movies has changed. So
that's a good point.
You're probably, yes.
I blame MTV.
And the advancement of CGI. They're used to, you see, we like practical, but a lot of this generation, the younger kids, these kids these days, they are they don't know any better. They don't know any different. I mean, my kids literally will go up to they don't do it anymore, but when they were like, 2 and 3 and whatever, they're going up to my TV and doing like pulling their fingers apart because they're thinking it's an iPad and they can make the screen larger.
Yeah,
and I'm like, don't. And so I have a bunch of fingerprints on my TV screen.
I think a lot of what that boils down to is that we've kind of lost the idea that less is more.
Yeah.
That to me is what makes a good horror film.
Absolutely.
Like it's not the gore, it's not
don't
how
need to
over
see
the
it.
top you can be, it's what you don't see that should scare the crap out of you. That's why Jaws ended up being so incredible. If Spielberg had been able to do everything he wanted to do in Jaws, it would not have been as good a movie.
Agreed.
But when
I
you
think
hear
probably
the
not.
music and you just see somebody's legs from underneath, that's terrifying. That tells you this thing is near and you can't see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was far worse than what you could see. When the shark finally does show up at the end of that movie, it becomes a different film.
That's the best stuff. When he's
We're going to need a bigger boat.
well, yeah, my favorite though, right before that, he's doing this, and I forget what the line before, and he's smoking a cigarette. He goes,
come out here and
chum some of this shit. Comes up, and the shot of him whipping back up like this.
Roy Scheider. is
Roy
such an amazing
Scheider did
actor.
that masterfully. That was a beautiful moment.
So good.
Richard Dreyfuss, I think, also delivered a career best performance in that. Robert Shaw delivered
Everybody
a
in
career best
that was-
performance in
was-
that.
I have to say about, I don't even know how long this podcast has been now, but 45 minutes ago when you were talking sadly about the boating accident of was it George Lucas' son. I just want to be like, this is not a boating accident. And I'm like, I can't do that. This is terrible. So I'll wait 45 minutes and then I'll say it. But the scariest moment for me in Jaws as a kid was not the leg coming down, but it was when Dreyfuss goes in the boat to find the guy, and the head pops out.
Holy
and he
crap.
loses the tooth. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that was one of the first jump scares I'd ever been exposed to as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I
Talking
thought
about influential.
That was. And now, of course, I hate jump scares because they're cheap and overused.
Yeah, but when it's done well, when it's in context, and
I'll give you one.
A slight tangent. Haunting of Hill House, the Netflix series.
Oh,
I don't know if you guys saw it, the recent one. Without spoiling anything. Oh, all right.
I haven't seen it.
Well, without spoiling anything at all, they use maybe two jump scares in the whole thing. I mean, it's really masterful horror storytelling. But they have a jump scare at one point that was so amazing because you always know when a jump scare is coming up. It's, you know, somebody's closing the door to the medicine cabinet or whatever.
Oh, God.
Or they go down against something and then come back up and there's something in the...
In this, there's something going on. It was a tense situation, but it was a totally believable tense situation that you're totally invested in. And all of a sudden, there's this jump scare, completely unexpected, and it was so effective. I really appreciated it because jump scares have become so ubiquitous and cheap.
Agreed.
That this was like, it just was another element of making this show that was really masterful.
I'll tell you one of the best jump scares that I remember seeing was in Aliens, not the first one, but the James Cameron one. There's a scene when they're in like a lab or something and they're seeing all the little,
the face huggers. Yeah.
face huggers. Yeah. So there's one where there's one in like a formaldehyde jar or whatever. And I'm seeing in the theater, and I remember that someone's looking over at it. Maybe it was Bill Paxton, and he looks over at it, he kind of taps at it, and then it just goes, foomp. It just moves.
Tiny little movement.
Just a little movement to the end of the
Paul
thing.
Reiser.
Was a Paul Reiser. Okay. And I remember I was so tense in the movie just in general. I was sitting like this, and when that happened,
Great movie.
I went, oh! And I jumped back, and I, no joke, pulled a muscle in my leg. Wow. And the whole rest of the movie, I was like, oh, my leg hurts. This movie is so good. My leg hurts so bad. I mean, it was just terrible because of this jump scare that I was not expecting.
And it wasn't much of a jump scare.
It wasn't.
Subtle thing.
But it was, they were building it throughout the whole thing, and then, it gets to that point, and so I'm already kind of tense, and then something like that's so simple. And I wasn't expecting it because it wasn't your typical,
first Alien was another one where they did the same type of thing as with Jaws, where
Tom Skerritt's coming down the thing, and he sees.
Well, I just mean the whole
less is
that
more.
You don't see.
Yeah.
There's all these indications of it, and of course the chest burster you see,
Right.
But the alien itself, the xenomorph, you see
I
indications
thought
of
about
it, but they save it.
For when he's coming down the thing, and then he turns, and he's like.
There was. I'm glad you brought that up because that's been in the back of my mind since we started talking about Jaws as well. Because I kind of like I treat Jaws and or Alien as the They kind of go back and forth as best horror movie of all time in my list. I think AFI, actually, the AFI list has them at 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But I give a lot of credit to Ridley Scott having put that together because he did shoot a lot of stuff with the guy in the xenomorph suit. And in looking at the dailies and like the test footage, he decided that really took away from the mystique of it, that took away from the horror. When you could see the whole thing, it wasn't as terrifying anymore. It was a guy in a suit. And so he instead chose cutaways of parts of the creature, or just reactions of the actors, which really, like Veronica Cartwright in particular. Man, what an incredible damsel in distress in that movie. She made me so nervous just watching her throughout that time. Even when she's not terrified, he just, her general nervousness was so infectious in that movie. And that I think is a really good textbook horror film of you don't show everything if you want true terror in your audience.
Yeah. Now on that note, springboarding off of what we talked about earlier about, moments that, you hear about, but has it been played up as lore?
Same thing.
The initial, explosion to the chest. I heard that the actors didn't know that was going to happen.
There's so many urban legends around that.
Yeah, only John heard it, but that's not true.
I've thought about that. It's like, there's no way you're hiding that rig.
There's no way. There's no way that happens.
I'm wondering.
Maybe because Veronica Cartwright, I think she's the one that with the short. She was the one that was like right there with the blood in her face. Yeah. Maybe they don't tell her.
I think probably it's kind of like the Raiders thing where. Yeah. It's like maybe they knew something was going to happen, but they didn't know exactly what was going to happen or the extent of it. So they knew there was a rig. They knew something was going to come out, but they didn't know exactly what it was going to be. Okay. And they always say that her reaction was a pure, honest reaction because she was so freaked out. We could do a whole other tangent on that. I have my own personal feelings about directors who do that to actors.
I do as well.
And like, the thing with Alan Rickman in Die Hard where they didn't tell him.
Oh, we're going to drop you on 3?
Yeah. And they dropped him early and it's like, we got this real reaction out of you. I know.
Oh, at the end with the watch.
I'm in the Laurence Olivier camp. Yeah, of acting. Another classic Hollywood urban legend. You don't know how much is a Marathon Man.
I just was looking that up the other day for a Facebook discussion, and that may not have happened. It's
such a great story.
Yeah, though. You should probably go ahead and tell what the story is.
Okay, Marathon Man is Laurence Olivier, Sir Laurence Olivier, and Dustin Hoffman, a young Dustin Hoffman. That's so appropriate. And so, it's a torture scene. It's, I guess the plot is he's, an old Nazi, I guess, and Dustin Hoffman's character has discovered this and he's got him in a basement somewhere and it
actually wasn't that scene. It was the one where he had been running from them and been up all night.
Okay.
And it's supposed to just be, I don't think it was specifically the torture scene. Okay. It was one where
Dustin Hoffman Dustin Hoffman's character is supposed to look like he's really been put through the ringer. And he's, Dustin Hoffman being very much a method actor, decided he was going to prep for this scene by keeping himself awake. He deprived himself of sleep in actuality. And then he got up early in the morning of the shoot and put on like 7 pairs of sweats and did laps around a track and didn't eat anything and came in just a sweaty, horrible, sleep deprived mess and got on the set and said, okay, I'm ready for this scene now. And as the story goes, Sir Laurence Olivier, who probably had a lovely steak dinner the night before and got a full 8 hours of sleep, woke up refreshed and glanced at his lines, went over to Dustin Hoffman and said, my dear boy, why don't you just act?
Right.
That's how the story goes.
Now, what I have found since that is that Dustin Hoffman says that actually what had happened was he'd been out partying the night before.
It's not nearly as...
Yeah, and so he said that he
that's even funny.
He told them that that's what he was doing, that he was prepping for the scene.
Not nearly the professional he wants us to believe.
Then there's like 4 or 5 different versions of exactly what Laurence Olivier said, but the gist of it was still just act. One of the more skeptical aspects or reviews of him saying that was like Laurence Olivier would never say something that was so dismissive of the art of acting. Who knows? I mean, it may be he perfectly respects acting, just realizes you can just do that instead of the other stuff. But anyway, yes. So that's another one of those Hollywood legends that may or may not be true, but.
Just a tangent we got off of because we're talking about directors abusing their actors.
Yes. That's right.
But I think it's important to note that there are different perspectives on what is the most influential movie too. We are all very much like all the movies we chose were, late 70s, early 80s, because our formative time. Sure. I've had this conversation with my 17-year-old daughter at the same time. For her, the franchise or the movies that really kind of defined her development are the movies in the MCU, the Marvel superhero movies. Okay. That is her Star Wars. That is her Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those are the movies that have, and it's funny because I look at those and I think, yeah, I love those movies. I absolutely adore those movies. They are very different from what I grew up with.
But I'm sure you could imagine if you were a 13, 14, 15-year-old seeing those movies for the first time, that would, I mean, I could definitely see for me they would be my Star Wars movies.
For her, those were the moments where she realized this is what movies can be.
Exactly.
This is what character is. She immediately fell in love with Captain America. She loves how pained Tony Stark is in the Iron Man movies. These are the characters that really speak to her and showed her what storytelling is from a cinematic perspective. And I have to totally respect that.
Yeah.
And I think I think a lot of people are going to say Harry Potter from a younger generation now.
Which I can see. I can see that because those were big blockbuster, really visual, et cetera, movies for those. Because those were the things that were like that were available for them at that age.
Yeah.
I don't think those are great movies. I think if they had seen other movies that fit into that category at that age, they would be more influential than Harry Potter, but I understand what you're saying, that those were the big spectacle movies of their time. So interesting. Just my son, who, like we said, is 19. His, I think, is Attack the Block.
Interesting.
Actually, I think my kid's got pretty good sense of. I respect his opinions on movies.
That's almost kind of an art house film.
Exactly. I respect his opinions on movies because he has well considered reasons for how he feels about movies, but he liked that one for that reason. It was small. The storytelling was fantastic. The fact that the creatures, kind of like Jaws and like Alien, you don't really see them.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was a really excellent, exciting kind of horror, sci-fi action movie.
I love that movie.
So for a younger generation, for him, it was that one.
It's also important to note genre. True. Because we've really focused on the blockbusters and specifically the blockbuster fantasy and sci-fi type of thing, or the action of Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I think there's different influential things from different genres.
Right.
I personally think there are a lot of dramas that don't have any kind of supernatural element that had big impacts on me. A lot of comedies, like you mentioned Airplane earlier. Yeah. They informed how we view comic timing or comic delivery.
Right. Yeah. No. For me, going back to it, things like Platoon had its effect on me. Princess Bride. Huge effect on me. Pulp Fiction for non-linear storytelling.
They all inform a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, there's lots of different movies of different genres and different styles that had a big influence on me in different ways, which is why it was difficult for me to pick one thing that was just influential. But in terms of, like we're saying, in terms of loving movies, like I said,
it's not an easy answer.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not. Yeah, it's not necessarily black or white. But Raiders obviously comes to mind for loving movies and that influence. But influencing me in terms of having an interest in acting and performing, it was seeing great performances and finding moments. One that always stands out to me, I've always loved Tom Hanks. Back when he did Bosom Buddies, I thought he was hilarious in Bosom Buddies. But, Big was, I thought, just a fantastic movie. I thought he was great in that. And Forrest Gump, the there's sort of like a weird kind of, I don't know if time has been, I still think it's considered a classic. I still think it's great, but I know that some people, and you might feel this way.
I don't particularly he was fine, but as a movie,
I can totally respect that. But there was a moment in that movie that to this day, whenever I see it, it always chokes me up. It's the moment when he sees Jenny and he goes to her apartment and he sees his son for the first time and realizes it's his kid. And there's this moment in line where he kind of looks at her and he goes, is he smart or is he, and he can't finish it. And in that moment, it's like, oh, wow. He cause the whole time you're thinking Forrest Gump's not aware of his, intelligence level. Mm-hmm. He's just kind of zipping through life and everything's cool. And in that moment, that choice was, he knows.
Yeah.
He absolutely
he's going
knows.
to say, is he like me?
Exactly. Yeah. And so not only just everything about it, the choice to have the line, his delivery of the line, that stopping short of saying it, just like the choking up, it was like, it just blew me away. And
every now and then, Tom Hanks reminds me of just what an incredible actor he actually is. The end of Captain Phillips, the final scene of that.
And he's become associated more with serious acting and drama now, but some of his early comedy stuff, not just the movies, too much, I won't go into it.
Every now and then he reminds you of that, too.
Yeah, well, but I mean, just he had a guest spot in Taxi, where he was hilarious, and his comic timing was unbelievably fantastic. And he's got moments, I mean, looking back on it now, Bosom Buddies, probably a little problematic, but but he's got some moments in that show where it's just, it's like, how did you think to do it that way?
It was like there was this moment where all of Hollywood discovered him. He had this string of hit movies that suddenly, like, everything he did was solid gold.
Right.
I mean, he was like, I don't know, I guess they put him in Big. Penny Marshall put him in Big, and everybody was like, oh, that was great, and this is a perfect role for him because he's such a great comic actor. But then came A League of Their Own, and you're like, ooh, he's showing a little bit more of a range here. Then came this unbelievable, like, Oscar string of, like, there was Philadelphia, Forrest Gump, Apollo 13, Saving Private Ryan. It was just like smash hit, smash hit, smash it, smash it, and he knocked it out of the park every single time. He had a very good 1990s.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really hope that if we ever get visited by aliens, it is during his lifetime, because he is really the only person who can represent the human race and you don't have to worry about it. It's like, he's got no skeletons in his closet as far as we know. So he is the best of us.
He is the best of us. So that to me is always just like movies like that where you're just, those moments, like you talk about iconic moments in film, moments that just make you feel, when they can do that to you, that's always going to be influential to me. So, yep.
So that's what influential means.
Webster's defines it as.
The movie files have now told you what influential movies. We should probably have a blanket spoiler disclaimer at the start of everything. I mean, we're talking about some older films.
That's true. We are talking about older
films. But,
there will be spoilers, and we can always, we can, if we know we're going to talk spoilers, we can say, just skip forward 20 minutes.
We need a submarine alarm. Spoiler alert. Or was it Kentucky Fried Movie? The guy with the megaphone walking around going, op, 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 op. And that was the...
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay. That's your homework.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've never seen it, so.
Oh,
okay. Really?
Yeah, never seen it.
If you like Airplane and how that changed movies, go check out Zucker and Abrams' earlier work.
I like Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Movie. Get yourself a bucket of KFC.
Kentucky Fried. I think you'd like Kentucky Fried Movie. You definitely see where they're going. It's vignettes. It's not a full movie, but
it's like sketch comedy.
But it's got all the same type of humor that they did.
Nice.
Dumb literal humor.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our first podcast for the Movie Files, right?
Yes, I'm pleased.
Yes.
Thank you for sitting through it.
Well, I had to be here. Oh, you're talking about
to all two of our audience members.
That's right.
Thanks, Mom. All right. Till next time.
I'm Stephon.
I'm Steve.
And I am Dave.
And we're the Movie Files.
That's the cheesiest
we're editing
thing
that out.
Yeah, please.
Thanks for listening.